Hello everybody and welcome back to another Algebra 1 video. Today we will be continuing Chapter 9 with Lesson 9.4 on solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. Here is a brief introduction to what the quadratic formula is. It is yet another way to solve quadratic equations. All throughout Chapter 9 we've been looking at different methods like graphing, completing the square, or using square roots. For today's lesson, we're going to look at how to solve quadratic equations in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals to 0. And you always want to make sure that your quadratic equation is equal to 0. Here is the actual quadratic formula. It is x equals to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And so what you want to do is plug in your values for a, b, and c into your quadratic formula. And once you simplify everything out, you'll see that you get two values, one for the plus, one for the minus, that are going to be your solutions for x. So let's go ahead and look at how this works with an example. Here we have the quadratic equation 2x squared minus 5x plus 3 equals 0. Again, make sure that your quadratic equation is equal to 0. In this case, it is, so we're good to go. Identify your a, b, and c values. Remember that the form is ax squared plus bx plus c. In this case, your a value would be positive 2. Your b value would be negative 5. Make sure you're looking at the signs that are in front of your values, and your c would be positive 3. Once you've identified your a, b, and c values, you can go ahead and plug it into the quadratic formula. So first part of the quadratic formula is negative b. In this case, our b value is negative 5. So I would go ahead and put your negative 5 in parentheses, and then plus or minus the square root of b squared. Again, our b value is negative 5, so I'll go ahead and put our negative 5 in parentheses, minus 4, and then times your a value. Your a value in this case would be positive 2, and your c value would be 3. And then that would be all over 2 times your a value, which is positive 2. And so now you can simplify this out. The negative times the negative 5 would cancel out, and that would give you positive 5, and then plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared, which would just be positive 25, and then minus 4 times 2 would be 8, and then times 3 would equal to 24. So you would have the square root of 25 minus 24, which would just simplify to the square root of 1. And then that would be over 2 times 2, which just simplifies to positive 4. So here is the simplified version. We would have 5 plus or minus square root 1 over 4. You can further simplify this to just 5 plus or minus 1 over 4. And then once you have that, you can go ahead and simplify for your two x values. So you would do 1 for 5 plus 1 over 4, and then you can also do 1 for 5 minus 1 over 4. So in this case, 5 plus 1 would be 6 over 4. This can simplify by 2. So if you reduce this, it would be 3 over 2. For 5 minus 1 over 4, 5 minus 1 is just 4. And then that would be over 4. Then 4 over 4 just simplifies to 1. So your two x values would be 3 over 2 and 1. Here is another example for us to try. We're going to solve this quadratic equation using the quadratic formula. First thing I like to do is make sure that our equation is equal to 0. In this case it is, so we can move on to identifying our a, b, and c values. Remember, the form is ax squared plus bx plus c. Now we can identify a, b, and c. A is going to be -6, b is going to be +7, and c is going to be -2. Remember to pay attention to the sign in front of your numbers. And now we can plug it into our quadratic formula. First part of the quadratic formula is -b. In this case, we would have negative times our b value 7, and then plus or minus the square root of b squared. Again, our b value is +7, then so 7 squared minus 4 times our a value, -6, times our c value, -2. And that would be all over 2 times our a value, -6. And once you've plugged in all your values, you can go ahead and start simplifying. So negative times 7 would just simplify to -7. That would be plus or minus the square root of 49, since 7 squared is 49, then minus 4 times -6, which would be -24, and then -24 times -2. Our negatives would cancel, and we would get +48. So this would be square root 49 minus 48. And that could just simplify to square root 1. And then finally, 2 times -6 equals to -12. So our simplified equation would be -7 plus or minus square root 1 over -12. In this quick case, square root 1 would just simplify to 1. So you would have -7 plus or minus 1 over -12. And now you can go ahead and evaluate this. In this case, -7 plus 1 over -12 would equal to -6 over -12. And that would simplify to +1 over 2, since the negatives would cancel out. And then you can also do one for -7 minus 1 over -12. -7 minus 1 would be -8 over -12. Again, the negatives would cancel, and you can actually reduce this by a factor of 4, and that would be 2 over 3. So your two solutions for x would be 2 over 3 and 1/2. Here is another example for us to try. We have the quadratic equation 4x squared plus 20x plus 25 equals to 0. Our quadratic equation already equals to 0, so we can go ahead and identify our a, b, and c values. Again, here is our equation format. Our a value is going to be 4, b value is going to be 20, and c value will be 25. Now that we've identified a, b, and c, let's plug it into the quadratic formula. First part would be negative times our b value, in this case 20, and then plus or minus the square root of b squared, which would be 20, squared minus 4 times our a value, which is 4, times our c value, which is 25. And that would be all over 2 times our a value. Again, our a value is 4. Now that you've plugged in your a, b, and c values, we can go ahead and simplify. First off, this would just be -20, and then plus or minus the square root of 20 squared, which would just be 400, and then minus, so I'm going to go ahead and simplify 4 times 25 first, and that would just be 100, and then that would be 4 times 100, so this would be minus 400, and then that would be all over 2 times 4, which is just 8. Once you've simplified that, 400 minus 400 would just be square root 0, and so this would just simplify to negative 20 plus or minus 0 over 8. And since you can't really add or subtract anything by 0, all you have to do is evaluate negative 20 over 8. You can just completely cancel out the 0 if you'd like. And then negative 20 over 8 can actually reduce by a factor of 4. And so that would be negative 5 over 2. And in this case, you actually only have one x value, and that would be negative 5 over 2. Here is another equation that we can solve using the quadratic formula. We have negative 5x squared plus x equals to negative 4. The form that we want our equation in is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. In this case, our equation actually isn't equal to 0, so we want to set our equation to 0 just by adding 4 to both sides. 4 would cancel, and you would get negative 5x squared plus x plus 4 equals to 0. And now you can go ahead and identify your a, b, and c values. A value would be negative 5, b value would be 1. If you don't see anything in front of your variable, you can just know that it is 1. And then your c value would be positive 4. Here is the quadratic equation. We have x equals negative b. In this case, our negative b value would be negative 1. And then plus or minus the square root of b squared. Again, b value is 1, so 1 squared minus 4 times our a value, negative 5, times our c value, positive 4, all over 2 times our a value, which is negative 5. We've plugged in a, b, and c, and now we can go ahead and simplify. Just simplify to negative 1. Then plus or minus the square root of 1 squared, which is just 1, minus 4 times negative 5, which is negative 20. Then negative 20 times 4 equals to negative 80. So this would be negative 1 minus negative 80. And when you're subtracting by a negative, your negative would turn into a positive sign, so this would be 1 plus 80, and so 1 plus 80 is just the square root of 81, and that's just 9. Then for our 2a, we would have 2 times negative 5, and this is just negative 10. So here is the simplified form, negative 1 plus or minus 9 over negative 10. And now you can just evaluate 1 for negative 1 plus 9 over negative 10, and then 1 for negative 1 minus 9 over negative 10. So negative 1 plus 9 is just positive 8 over negative 10. This can reduce by a factor of 2, so that would be negative 4 over 5, and then for negative 1 minus 9, that would be negative 10 over negative 10. The negatives would cancel, and this would just be positive 1. So your two x values are negative 4 over 5 and positive 1. We're going to move into our next concept called the discriminant. It's actually represented by the expression b squared minus 4ac, which you might recognize from the quadratic equation. Whenever you're plugging in your a, b, and c values into b squared minus 4ac, make sure you don't take the square root of it. It's just this expression right here. And what we use the discriminant for is to determine the number of real solutions in a quadratic equation. So I'll go ahead and just review how to interpret the discriminant. Remember that there are 3 possible outcomes whenever you're trying to find the solutions of a quadratic equation. first is that there are two real solutions. If you were to graph the quadratic equation, your parabola would go through 2 points on the x-axis. And you would know that there are two real solutions if the discriminant is greater than 0 or if the discriminant is just positive. If the discriminant is equal to 0, you have one real solution, and if you were to graph that equation, it would just have one x-intercept, which would be the vertex. And lastly, if the discriminant is less than 0, otherwise if it's negative, there are going to be no real solutions, and if you look at it on a graph, you'll see that it never intersects or intercepts the x-axis. Let's go ahead and look at an example. We're going to determine the number of real solutions for the quadratic equation x squared plus 8x minus 3 equals 0. Similar to the quadratic equation, first thing you want to do is make sure that your equation is set to 0, and then just identify your a, b, and c values. In this case, our a value is 1. Remember that if you don't see anything in front of a variable, it just means that it's the value 1. Then your b value would be positive 8, and your c value would be negative 3. Now our discriminant is b squared minus 4 times a times c. So b squared, our b value is 8, so that would be 8 squared minus 4 times a value, which is 1, and our c value, which is negative 3. This would just simplify to 64 minus 4 times 1 is just positive 4 times negative 3, which is negative 12. So this would be 64 minus negative 12. And so once we've simplified that, we can just go ahead and evaluate that. 64 minus negative 12, our minus would just turn to a positive, so 64 plus 12. And 64 plus 12 equals to 76. Now you can go ahead and interpret the discriminant. In this case, our value is greater than 0, and it's positive, so we know that there are two real solutions for our quadratic equation. Here is another example. We have the quadratic equation 2x squared minus 6x plus 7 equals 0. Again, our quadratic equation is already equal to 0, so we can go ahead and identify our a, b, and c values. In this case, the a value is positive 2, b value is negative 6, and c value is positive 7. Now we can plug this into our discriminant expression, which is b squared minus 4ac. So our b value is negative 6, so this would be negative 6 squared, minus 4 times our a value, which is 2, times our c value, which is 7. So negative 6 squared just simplifies to 36, minus 4 times 2, which is 8, times 7, which is 56. And now you can evaluate what is 36 minus 56. That would just be negative 20. And so interpreting your discriminant, our discriminant in this case is negative, so that means there are no real solutions to our equation. That is it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions about the concepts or problems you see in the video, please feel free to contact me at kaylin.david24@gmail.com. All information regarding additional practice, tutoring, and lesson requests will be linked down below in the description box. Please make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I hope to see you in the next video.